Modern definitions of extreme wealth usually focus on tech founders with net worths that seem to dissolve the boundaries of common sense. But even the largest modern portfolios are secondary to the historical scale of Mansa Musa, a 14th century ruler of the Mughal Empire. His life presents a unique case study in economic utility. What happens to a person's influence when they hold more capital than the global market can actually process? This portion of the Catalan Atlas illustrates the geographic reality of his reach. The Mughal Empire controlled 400,000 square miles across West Africa, a territory rich in the era's most vital commodities. To understand this level of wealth, we have to look past bank accounts and focus on the absolute control of a continent's raw physical resources. Musa held a near-total monopoly on the global supply of gold, extracting tons of the metal directly from his own soil. Gold was only half of the foundation. His empire also controlled the Saharan salt trade, a mineral so critical for preservation that it was traded ounce for ounce like currency. Yet, in this raw state, these materials represented potential energy rather than active power. Realizing that power required Musa to move his wealth across the world. In 1324, Musa initiated a 4,000-mile pilgrimage across the Sahara, leading a caravan that functioned as a moving city. The logistics were immense, involving 60,000 personnel and dozens of camels carrying roughly 21 tons of pure gold. Parading this volume of resources across a continent functioned as a strategic projection of imperial power, signaling Mali's dominance to every kingdom along the route. When the caravan reached Cairo, they entered the most significant economic hub of the medieval Mediterranean. Musa immediately began distributing his gold, providing massive gifts to local officials and handing out fortunes to the city's poor. The sheer volume of gold entering the city was an economic weight the local system was not equipped to process. When the supply of gold suddenly crashed down, it far outpaced demand. As the market flooded, gold lost its value, and Cairo's currency was destroyed. This triggered a decade-long economic depression, taking 10 years to recover from Musa's spending. Raw wealth acts as a destructive force when it is dumped into a system without direction. Musa had learned that gold is merely a mineral until it is harnessed for a permanent purpose. Upon his return to Mali, Musa's strategy for his fortune shifted. He began to look past immediate spending. He stopped the indiscriminate distribution of gold and began funneling his resources into permanent infrastructure, focusing his attention on Timbuktu. He commissioned massive architectural projects, including the Sankor Mosque, which introduced unique mud brick designs to the region's skyline. To populate these structures, he financed the travel and salaries of international scholars, scientists, and architects from across the Islamic world. The accumulated knowledge in Timbuktu's libraries rivaled any institution in Europe. These manuscripts represent a pivot from a wealth of minerals to a wealth of information. By prioritizing infrastructure over handouts, Musa transformed a depletable resource into an enduring intellectual foundation. Historical net worths are eventually forgotten as empires change, but Timbuktu's reputation as a center of learning has endured for 7 centuries. Musa's title as the richest man in history is a secondary detail compared to the physical and social structures he left behind. Ultimately, an individual's legacy is defined by the physical and intellectual shifts they leave behind, their capacity to permanently alter the course of human history. Search for the richest person in history, and the results usually point toward Mansa Musa and the legendary gold dust he carried across Africa. But Augustus Caesar operated on a different scale. He personally controlled an estimated 1/3 of the entire world's economic output. This chart visualizes that concentration of capital. That 33% slice represents a level of individual control that modern global GDP equivalents can barely map. This capital was secured through a brutal, hostile takeover of the ancient world. Decades before he secured that wealth, the Roman Republic was effectively bankrupt. It was a failing state tearing itself apart through relentless civil war. The assassination of Julius Caesar shattered the existing political structure, leaving a vacuum where a thriving republic once stood. Into this landscape stepped Caesar's 18-year-old adopted heir, Octavian. He entered a war zone surrounded by veteran generals, possessing no traditional political leverage of his own. Octavian had to survive the assassins, but his primary objective was to pacify and monetize a completely fractured society. Octavian's strategy relied on eliminating his final market rivals, starting with the seasoned general Mark Antony. His second target was Cleopatra, the gatekeeper to the wealthiest independent state left in the Mediterranean. At the historic Battle of Actium, Octavian forced a climax that wiped out the competition in a single decisive engagement. Victory meant the acquisition of Egypt, which functioned as the agricultural breadbasket of the ancient world. By absorbing Egypt's grain production, Octavian secured the underlying revenue stream to fund his empire. With his rivals gone, Octavian adopted the title Augustus, signaling an end to the civil wars and the start of a unified authority. He structurally transitioned Rome from a representative republic to an autocratic empire, dismantling the political checks and balances that limited his reach. This shift effectively blurred the line between his personal estate and the state treasury, making Augustus the owner of the Roman economy. To protect his investments, Augustus converted chaotic militias into a permanent, standing professional army, paid directly by his estate. He directed his vast capital into massive infrastructure projects, specifically the Roman road network, designed for durability and rapid deployment. These efforts established the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. Ending internal warfare allowed domestic markets across the territory to stabilize. This map shows the economic result. The combination of safe roads and protected sea routes caused cross-border trade to rise, with Augustus positioned to tax every transaction. These infrastructure investments turned a fractured world into a closed-loop economic machine under one man's control. Returning to the comparison with Mansa Musa, his wealth was defined by physical, static gold reserves. This chart illustrates the difference. On the left is physical wealth. On the right is Augustus's structural wealth, control over the taxation and GDP of multiple modern nations. Structural wealth compounds. While a gold vault remains finite, Augustus's system expanded, capturing the commerce it taxed. Historical power is measured by the exclusive control of global infrastructure, enforced peace, and trade networks. The blueprint of the Roman Empire proves Augustus wasn't just wealthy, he was the first man to successfully buy the world. To understand the global economy in the late 16th century, look at this chart comparing estimated national wealth. The combined GDP of major European nations is absolutely dwarfed by a single superpower, the Mughal Empire. In today's terms, this was an economic engine valued at over $1 trillion. The architect of this massive wealth-generating machine was an unlikely young ruler named Akbar. He inherited control of a deeply unstable kingdom and engineered it into a global titan. But the Indian subcontinent he took over was far from unified. It was a highly fragmented landmass, culturally fractured and plagued by constant, shifting regional warfare. Securing territory is a military feat, but converting that land into a sustainable revenue stream requires navigating a social minefield. Extracting consistent wealth from a divided population demands a system that prevents friction from turning into open rebellion. Akbar achieved this by reverse engineering the mechanics of empire building. He deployed a three-part system designed to systematically process regional chaos into an integrated economic engine. The first phase of this system was raw resource gathering. Akbar launched vast military campaigns for aggressive expansion, securing the vast territorial footprint his future state would require. The Mughal military relied on swift cavalry and immense tactical flexibility. This allowed them to rapidly absorb rival territories and crush local warlords before they could mount a unified defense. This expansion was highly calculated. The military systematically targeted and assimilated regions containing the highest agricultural yields and the most lucrative global trade routes. While this massive military footprint secured the raw resources and territorial scale necessary for a superpower, brute force alone cannot process wealth. A fortress can hold land, but it cannot count grain. Once the land was secured, Akbar faced a massive administrative hurdle. He needed a frictionless system to convert endless fields of grain and localized trade into measurable, taxable wealth. He began by rolling out a rigorously standardized currency. By replacing dozens of local currencies with a uniform coin, he immediately eliminated regional trade barriers across previously disconnected provinces. Next, he overhauled the tax code. He introduced the Zabt system, a meticulous land revenue model. It calculated taxes based strictly on regional crop yields and 10-year rolling averages. This exact mathematical approach bypassed local warlords entirely, connecting rural farmers directly to the central state treasury. With standardized taxes and a unified currency, merchants operated with complete mathematical certainty. This triggered a massive surge in the production and export of high-value commercial goods, pulling vast amounts of foreign silver into the Mughal economy. The state immediately reinvested this liquid wealth into monumental infrastructure, funding the construction of strategic forts and administrative capitals that housed his growing bureaucracy. Akbar's relentless focus on administration successfully converted chaotic, raw territorial gains into a highly streamlined, high-yield revenue engine. But this entire economic engine had a critical vulnerability. The Mughal rulers were a Muslim minority governing a vast, diverse Hindu majority, meaning the threat of a massive cultural and religious rebellion was a constant reality. Akbar approached religious integration as a deliberate mechanism of state stability. By aligning the interests of the diverse majority with the survival of the crown, he neutralized the primary source of internal rebellion. He systematically dismantled discriminatory laws, most notably abolishing the jizya, a specific tax levied exclusively on non-Muslims. Dropping this singular tax instantly secured the loyalty of millions of Hindu subjects. Politically, he assimilated fierce, rival Rajput leaders directly into his own military and administrative hierarchy. Instead of fighting them, he gave them a share of the empire's success, turning potential enemies into literal stakeholders. He even established a centralized intellectual hub where scholars of Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and Jainism were actively encouraged to openly debate philosophy, fostering a deeply integrated culture of syncretism. By removing the social and economic incentives for his population to revolt, Akbar practiced brilliant economic loss prevention. Radical tolerance ensured that his trillion-dollar output remained completely uninterrupted. By the end of Akbar's reign, the Mughal Empire had achieved a staggering operational scale and deep cultural permanence. The wealth generated was so immense, it physically reshaped the subcontinent's architecture. These systems, military reach, administrative precision, and social inclusion, functioned as a single circuit. Expansion provided the land, administration extracted the silver, and tolerance ensured the merchants and farmers remained invested in the system rather than rising against it. Akbar's ultimate legacy was not the vast acreage of land he conquered. His real achievement was the highly resilient bureaucratic and cultural blueprint that allowed the Mughal Empire to thrive and expand for generations after his death. To build true state-level wealth, capturing resources is only half the battle. Long-lasting geopolitical power relies on administrative genius and social integration just as heavily as it relies on military might. This chart compares the inflation-adjusted net worth of modern history's wealthiest individuals. On the left, founders of today's tech giants. On the right, that towering column belongs to John D. Rockefeller. His wealth equated to nearly 2% of the entire United States economic output. Accumulating that volume of capital raises an immediate question. How does an individual legally capture such a massive percentage of a nation's total wealth? To understand the math, we look at the world he was born into. In the mid-19th century, illuminating a home required whale oil. It was incredibly difficult to harvest, expensive to buy, and scarce. For the vast majority of the population, when the sun went down, the world simply went black. The entire global economy was starving for cheap, reliable light. There was a massive empty space in the market demanding a scalable energy solution. In 1859, a crude oil strike in Pennsylvania triggered a frantic rush. Prospectors flooded the state, throwing together wooden derricks. It was a chaotic lottery. Men struck it rich one day and lost everything the next, in devastating fires or dry wells. Stepping into this muddy frenzy was a young bookkeeper from Cleveland. Raised in a strict, deeply religious household, John D. Rockefeller was methodical, obsessed with neat ledgers, and highly disciplined. The chaos of the oil fields repulsed him. He realized quickly that pulling crude out of the ground was a gambler's game. The actual profit relied on what happened next. Crude oil by itself is useless. It has to be refined and purified into kerosene, a highly combustible fluid used for lamps. Instead of risking his capital on unpredictable wells, Rockefeller focused entirely on the refining process. Controlling the bottleneck where raw material became a usable consumer product gave him maximum leverage over the entire industry. Early kerosene refining was inconsistent. Poorly processed batches frequently exploded, burning down homes and terrifying consumers. Rockefeller countered this by naming his company Standard Oil. The name was a guarantee to the consumer that every single drop of fuel met a strict, uniform safety metric. This flowchart illustrates Rockefeller's mastery of vertical integration, a system where a business controls its own supply chain to slash costs. Standard Oil absorbed competing refineries, but it also bought the forests that provided the wood, built its own barrels, and operated its own transport wagons. He then leveraged his massive shipping volume to force secret rebate deals from the major railroads. Not only did Standard Oil pay significantly less to ship its kerosene, but the railroads actually paid Rockefeller a percentage of what his competitors were charged. Rivals suddenly found their shipping rates mysteriously doubled or tripled overnight. Rockefeller would approach these bleeding companies and offer a simple calculation: sell your refinery to Standard Oil for a fair price today, or face guaranteed bankruptcy. By systematically eliminating competitors and streamlining logistics, Standard Oil became a highly efficient, closed-loop economic engine. Rockefeller effectively secured a private toll on almost all the illumination fuel consumed in the United States. At its peak, Standard Oil captured roughly 90% of America's oil refining capacity. The physical footprint of this singular company stretched across the continent, dictating energy prices globally from a single boardroom. Yet the man at the center of this sprawling industrial giant lived a highly regimented, remarkably quiet life. Rockefeller adhered to a strict daily schedule of work, golf, and church, remaining notoriously frugal despite his immense capital. Outside that quiet life, public anger boiled over. Investigative journalists like Ida Tarbell published extensive reports detailing Standard Oil's aggressive buyouts and secret railroad kickbacks. Citizens and politicians began demanding federal intervention against the massive corporate octopus. This friction forced the public to grapple with a complex reality. Rockefeller had undeniably stabilized a chaotic industry and dropped the price of kerosene by nearly 80%, bringing cheap light to millions. But he achieved this by actively crushing the competitive free market. Standard Oil operated with such absolute authority that it rivaled the power of the federal government itself. A legal collision between Washington and Rockefeller's boardroom was unavoidable. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court delivered a landmark decision. They ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly, operating in restraint of trade, and ordered the immediate dissolution of the company. Looking at this map of the breakup, we see how the Leviathan shattered. Standard Oil was legally carved into 34 independent regional companies, dubbed the baby standards. Over time, these fragments evolved into modern energy giants we recognize today, including Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil. But the court's punishment arrived at a pivotal moment in technological history. The invention of the internal combustion engine created a sudden, massive consumer demand for gasoline, a byproduct of refining that Standard Oil used to dump in rivers. Because Rockefeller retained vast shares in all 34 of the new, highly competitive baby standards, the surging demand for gasoline caused the value of his stock portfolio to skyrocket. The government's effort to dismantle his empire directly multiplied his net worth, cementing his position as the richest American to ever live. In his later years, Rockefeller completely stepped away from corporate maneuvering, redirecting his intense focus toward the logistical challenge of giving his vast fortune away. He approached charity with the exact same ruthless efficiency he applied to refining crude oil. Rather than simply handing cash to individuals, he built systems. He institutionalized philanthropy, creating boards and foundations designed to attack the root causes of societal issues, rather than their symptoms. This scientific approach to giving yielded massive structural results. He funded the University of Chicago, financed medical research eradicating southern hookworm, and created global public health institutions. John D. Rockefeller remains an American paradox. He wrote the operational blueprint for corporate consolidation, forced the federal government to invent modern antitrust laws to stop him, and ultimately used the spoils of his monopoly to construct the architecture of modern global philanthropy.